All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Tanvir Arfi, and I will be your host in this session. For all the YPO members that are joining us, welcome, welcome. And for all of you who have not yet joined YPO, thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll give you enough of a reason today to consider membership. Let me first of all tell you a little bit about myself, and then I would like to introduce both our esteemed guests this morning as well. As I said, my name is Tanvir Arfi, and I am the founder and CEO of Banyan Technologies. I've been in the automotive industry for over 25 years now, but founded Banyan about 4 years ago. We are a parent company. Our portfolio primarily provides tech-enabled services and software to the automotive car manufacturers and to their dealership network. We also do some work with consumers, but mostly on behalf of car manufacturers. So enough about me. Let me maybe take just a quick minute and give you a little bit about what YPO is. So YPO stands for Young Presidents Organization. It's a peer-to-peer network of CEOs, presidents, owners of typically mid-market, lower middle market businesses in automotive, in business across the world. We are typically organized either by a chapter and also by a business interest. So as an example, I'm a member of YPO in Dallas, but I'm also a member of YPO Automotive Network. So my region is Dallas, but my business interest is automotive. That's what you would typically find a chapter and then multiple automotive networks. As I said, it's a peer-to-peer organization, so a lot of collaboration, a lot of networking, and frankly, learning opportunities, but in a confidential peer-to-peer setting. Today, we are live streaming this session on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on YouTube, and on Twitter. So use the comment section in any one of the platforms that you're joining us with, and then the forum, and then the moderator will be able to provide those questions to us, and we'll try to cover as many of your questions as we possibly can in our session. With that, I'd like to now invite our guests. So I'd like to introduce you to Joao and Kevin, my colleagues from YPO Portugal and from YPO Ghana. Joao, why don't you please take a few minutes and introduce yourselves to our guests, please?
Thanks so much, Tanvir. It's always a pleasure to participate in YPO events, and particularly around the things that we love, like the automotive industry. My name is João Barros. Up until July this year, I was Chief Executive Officer of Veniam, a tech company that basically enables vehicles to transfer huge amounts of data from the physical world to the cloud. And we just got acquired by Nexar Inc, the leading consumer dashcam company. So I'm actually brand new as Chief Platform Officer, and this is my first event of that part. In fact, myself, I divided my career in two periods. The first one, I approached vehicles and automotive from the communication side, building networks of vehicles, having vehicles communicate with each other and with the infrastructure, and then got increasingly more interested also in looking at vehicles also as data machines, and using AI to basically improve mobility, improve people's experiences, and also the safety of the various mobility systems that we use. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Joao, and welcome again. Kevin, welcome as well. Could you please take a couple of minutes and introduce yourself to our audience as well?
Okay, thank you, Tanvir. So my name is Kevin Dadzie. I'm the member of YPO Ghana chapter, currently the Assistant Learning Officer for YPO Ghana. And outside of YPO, I'm the Regional Manager for BP Oil. And I think most people would know that British Petroleum, but BP Oil primarily looking at fuel supply into Ghana and helping our other origination activities in the region. Clearly not in the automotive industry, but I provide fuel to the automotive industry to be able to keep it running. Part of the automotive network, which also means that I enjoy learning about automation, trying to find out about new vehicles, what's challenging the industry, and obviously looking at how from our industry as well, we're able to continue to support the automotive industry.
Thanks, you, Kevin. Tanvir. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
Welcome as well. Hey, Joao and Kevin, so both of you provided a professional introduction and congratulations, Joao, on the acquisition of the Nexar. Hopefully it was very rewarding for you. And Kevin, thank you for the information on how you are connected with the automotive industry. In my experience, I think the audience can get a little bit more of the context if they get a little bit more about our personalities. So if you don't mind, I'd like to ask both of you to please think and then tell me, what is your favorite car? Not necessarily a car you own, but maybe your favorite automobile. And to give you a few seconds while you're thinking, I will start with my favorite. So my favorite is a 1965, 68, that era Ford Mustang. It's not the most exotic car, but it is very traditional American muscle. It is a vehicle that is easily maintained. Lots of parts are available, tons of YouTube videos on how to work on various systems of the car. So it's not really a very valuable collector car unless you have something very unique with a very unique story. But it's a fun car that you can tweak with, spend a few hours on the weekend, and definitely is one of my favorites. Joao, would you mind sharing with our audience what your favorite car is?
Well, my first answer when you said it's better for the audience to get to know us, I was going to get my wife, but then you asked about a car, and so and I have to confess that I'm a very atypical member of the maybe atypical member of the automotive network of YPO. Because actually, you know, my favorite car would be an autonomous vehicle that is connected, electrical, where I don't have to drive, where I can do whatever I want and be safely transported from point A to point B, knowing that it's environmentally friendly. It is freeing up a lot of parking space in our cities for playgrounds and trees and green, and where we really move away from this mobility system of private ownership of cars and move into the future in a way that is much more friendly to the planet and also to people. While my friends who love cars could still go and drive cars, the same that my friends who love horses go and ride horses. And so that would be my favorite car. And I know I will get a lot of negative comments for this, but this is the honest answer to your question.
No, Joe, it's perfectly okay. I mean, remember, I had mentioned that it is a poor method, but it is a method of providing a little bit more into your personality. Thanks for sharing. Kevin, how about you? Kevin, what's your favorite?
So I have an aspirational car and a favorite car.
Oh, okay.
So my aspirational car is an Aston Martin, hopefully a DB9. And I think so far my favorite car is a Mercedes. Anything with a bit of turbo, with a little bit of power and speed should do it for me right now.
So Kevin, with that answer, what I'm getting is that it would be Kevin 007 in an Aston Martin then.
Correct. Exactly. Correct.
Hey, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing. For our audience that is listening live right now, feel free to use the comment section or the question section in the platform that you're using to watch this live. And feel free to post what your favorite car is as we're getting into this conversation. Joao and Kevin, if you guys don't mind, I will get into our first area of discussion. And the first area of discussion is around the supply chain disruption that we are facing as an industry, although not limited to us. Our industry is definitely facing considerable supply chain disruption. In fact, in December, YPO surveyed chief executives from 101 countries in 44 industry groups. and their sentiments for the supply chain disruption in 2022. 73% of the CEOs reported being concerned about the supply chain disruptions, and 88% of automotive CEOs cited supply chain disruption as one of their top concerns. So the question for you, Joao, I'll start with you first, is supply chain disruption, how has that affected your business, say in the last 6 months, and what do you anticipate seeing in the next 12?
Absolutely. So as a company that deals with hardware and software, that's basically making dash cams, but then all of the AI that goes into making that camera connected and intelligent, we obviously had to deal with component shortages, being able to rethink our supply chains in a way that guarantees the delivery of the devices. There was planning to have a large enough inventory to meet consumer demand, to be able to overcome some of these shortages. At the same time, the company has also launched the new 4K connected dash cam, Nexar 1, which has a lot of new technology and lots of new components, which required a lot of rethinking. For the industry as a whole, I think it's really a defining moment, because it became very, very clear that the way that cars and other vehicles were designed before just wasn't resilient against this type of phenomena, and the supply chain problems came on top of COVID, and now also with the Ukraine war, a very complicated geopolitical situation. And so I think that as in other domains, Tesla really showed the value of having full stack design in-house. They were able to change their hardware components and very, very quickly adapt the software to those new hardware components. And I think all the other car manufacturers were caught off guard, essentially because they were dependent, on being integrators of systems. And so the tier one suppliers had to, adapt one part and then the other part, and then it didn't match. And so in practice for our business, that meant that our auto OEM partners and customers really had their hands full for a very long period of time in figuring and sorting out, how to just keep their product development on track. And many innovation initiatives have been delayed. In one area that is dear to me, which is advanced connectivity, was one where clearly nobody denies that digital features are a huge differentiator, and consumers will buy a different car for a better digital experience and change brands in a way that they didn't before. But at the same time, having to push vehicles out of the factory, doing unthinkable things like sending out vehicles with missing components and then adding the components later. These are all things that kept our customers very, very busy and away from other innovation initiatives that we would have liked them to follow.
Kevin, how has your business been affected? And what do you expect happening in the next few months?
Sure. I think I'll take it on two fronts, right? So I'll take it on the automobile industry obviously felt the impact of the supply chain disruptions. And essentially consumers were struggling to place in orders for new cars, and dealerships were struggling to import new cars because you had the microchip supply disruption, you had manufacturing disruption, there were orders to bring in vehicles, and essentially nobody could tell when the market would recover. Nobody could tell when the first car would come in. And obviously that created a bigger impact in this market from a supply chain perspective. Now, mind you, this region is not into manufacturing. It's a massive consumer region. And so there's a lot of imports that come this way. And so the global supply chain disruption obviously had a domino effect in terms of consumer here. Now, from a fuel perspective, I think we were not left out at all. Disruptions in freight, disruption in shipping of oil into the region had a direct impact on the eventual cost of oil, right? The eventual cost of the product. which we saw sort of going up and up and up. And, there's more demand, supply was tight, and we saw oil prices just going through the roof. But what that's done in the region is that it's also put a lot of pressure on FX, on foreign exchange, which is creating another issue of foreign exchange liquidity crisis or access to foreign exchange crisis. And, the resultant impact of that is that puts the customers in a bit of a tight corner. So we continue to see that, but these things are not new, except that we're seeing them in unprecedented amounts. But I think that we're resilient to be able to work with the customers to recover in that area. So that's been the impact of the supply chain disruptions.
Joao, do you think we are towards the end of this, or do you anticipate this well into 2023?
Oh, definitely well into 2023, simply because right now there have been many decisions to actually shift production of semiconductors back, to Europe, to the United States. There have been decisions basically to try to make to diversify as much as possible supplier base. These are processes that take many months to actually be implemented in large organizations. Purchasing then obviously takes more time as well, and so essentially, I think the industry is in the middle of a large adaptation process to this new reality. At the same time, we have all the issues with COVID in China. There's all the Ukraine war seems far from over, and it's creating tension also in other parts of the world. And so I think that geopolitical situation is also not going to improve anytime soon. So overall, I think companies and CEOs are well advised right now, to continue basically adapting as much as possible, making sure that balance sheets are resilient to whatever comes now, and just diversify as much as possible the origins of the different critical components that they have for their products.
Thank you, Joao. So from our live audience, we are beginning to see questions coming in. I just wanted to remind all of you who are posting questions that we will be definitely taking them. I'm just trying to organize our conversation such that we keep them in the right kind of area of conversation. So there is a question on electric vehicles. There's a question on the new evolving consumer buying directly around the dealer from the OEM. We will address all of those. So please keep your questions coming. I'm not ignoring them. I just want to make sure that we're going into these discussions by area. Because there are a couple of questions on electrification already, why don't we move into that area? All right. So the next area of our conversation, let's see, is on electrification. Not new. I think all of us know that there is more and more electric cars coming onto the market. Every automaker seems to be heading that way. Some of them have made very boisterous claims about transferring their entire business model to all plug-in electric vehicles, etc. Some of this is due to global warming. Some of this is growing consumer demand, etc., etc. In fact, in May of this year, EY published a study which said that 52% of the global buyers are asking for an electrical vehicle and are actually willing to pay a premium for it. Wow. So why don't we start with maybe a quick commentary. Kevin, will come with you first, especially because your business model is to sell gasoline and gas consumption. So this is likely very disruptive to you. So maybe we'll start with you first. Where do you see this going? What do you think from your business model? Where is this going?
So I think, if you look at, BP globally, there's a lot of discussions, engagements, and discourses on transitioning to renewables, right? Which includes EV. So we recognize that the entire market between 2035 and 2050 will be transitioning into a low carbon environment, which is largely driven by EV cars, renewables, wind, solar, biomass, etc. So there's a whole host of renewable energy options that we think the industry will be transitioning into. But you look into the West African region, which is the region where we supply the most, and I would say that we think there's going to be a high dependency on fossil fuels for a while until the transition actually happens. And a lot of it is because of the barriers around high cost of EVs at the moment. Also availability and access to charging stations, because even in Europe, where BP does a great job in providing the charge master, we still don't have enough, right? There's still not enough charging stations to be able to meet the rising demand in EV. And if you look into our region, I don't think that our region is going to be exempt in terms of having access to enough charging systems and affordable charging systems. But I think that the region is aware. There's a general awareness. You would notice that every now and again, some consumers have imported a few EV cars. They have their own batteries at home, and they try to charge these cars. But we foresee that the migration or the transition from fossil fuels in this region to EV would take quite a while. But the factors that would increase the uptake would be around affordability. It would be around access to charging systems. And I suppose, just looking at licensing softwares that would allow customers to be able to charge even in a much quicker time. But like most regions, we also expect that there will be some sort of, home used cars that will be coming into this region. So it may not all be brand new, but there would also be used cars coming in to sort of enhance the affordability. But that would still take quite a couple of years for the market to be able to move into full EV. We still think that there'll be fossil fuel consumption in the market.
Kevin, maybe a quick follow-on question for you. Because your business model may not be in your region, but definitely say in Europe, Western Europe at least, or in the United States. Do you foresee that the BP branded or the BP gas stations could also become charging stations in the future?
I don't think I just foresee. I think that started already. So for a lot of BP stations in London, in Germany, in Spain, and across some parts of Europe, you've got the existing model where you've got your gasoline, gas oil, and then you've got the charging stations on one side where people can charge their cars within 20 minutes, 30 minutes to be able to give them a couple of kilometers. Now, I suppose at some point, with the great uptake on EV, there'll be more charging stations than you would have for fossil fuel refuels. So yes, we foresee that, and I'd like to say that has already started.
Joao, maybe I'll ask a very specific question to you on this topic. Okay, obviously, I'm very interested in your macro observations on electrification. I saw a statistic earlier this week that 90% of the US population lives within 10 miles of a dealership. Pretty certain that is a similar statistic in your region, in Europe as well. Do you see as electrification and as we move towards it and so many automakers start cutting through and the vast majority of what they build is electric cars, that their dealerships transform into de facto gas stations because there's so many of them and they have an infrastructure already built. They're typically close to a population zone. What do you think happens to the dealer network?
I actually think that this is tied to a number of trends in mobility that we need to pay attention to. One is the growth in remote work from home. When I talk to people, essentially they are thinking, yes, I want to have an electrical vehicle when they are very mindful about the environment and so on, but I want to be able to charge it primarily at home. When I ask people who own electrical vehicles in my country, in Portugal, and in the Europe region in general, the general sentiment is that it's very expensive, or they find it expensive, to charge the electrical vehicle outside of the house or of the office or place of work. And so generally, the main barriers I see right now in electrification is actually in people's homes. I live in an apartment building, and it's not very obvious, even now from building codes and so on, in the garage, which is a shared space for all the vehicles inside of the people who live inside this large apartment complex, how and in what way and how expensive will it be to actually have an electrical plug that is tied to your electrical grid and basically then build and charge to you, as opposed to the entire building. So practical things like that have actually, very little to do with the electrical vehicles themselves, but rather had to do also with the way that, the regulation for shared apartment buildings, which is the rule in Portugal where people live, that in Europe in general, that opens up all sorts of regulatory questions and practical questions that right now are barriers to the adoption of electrical vehicles in our region. I do think that more and more people are conscious about climate change and the environment and want to do their part, let's say, in contributing to that. Obviously, having electrical vehicles is also relevant in terms of geopolitical decisions of where energy is going to be coming from. When vehicles are electric, that electricity can be, renewables, like it would most likely be in Portugal with a lot of wind and hydro, but it can also be nuclear. It can be, obviously also some form of fossil fuels, which is not what we would like the most, but it gives governments and also flexibility on how to make the electrical mix that ultimately feeds into the transportation. And I think people are conscious now more than ever of all the implications, of electrification, which are not just, is my car gonna have enough range? These are practical things that people are still worried about, but I see more and more these other aspects of the energy mix and just in general, how resilient are we in terms of our transportation systems.
Why don't I take a few on this topic, questions that are coming from our audience, all right? So there are three very relevant ones to the topic we're covering right now. I'll take all three of them. The first one is, the question says, I feel inadequate charging infrastructure in India. And the question continues with, is there a risk of grid overload? Maybe I'll take this one. So the risk of grid overload is definitely real, in my view. I live in Dallas, here in Texas, and then I have a second home in Manhattan, in New York. And in both cases, especially in Manhattan, we get almost daily emails from the local electric providers saying, hey, reduce your consumption between the hours of 2 and 6, which obviously is peak demand in the afternoon when it is so hot. So clearly, there is a grid overload risk without even cars when the temperatures are really high. Now, on top of that, imagine plugging in 1 million electric cars also. So yes, I believe that risk is definitely there, but I'll echo maybe a little bit of what Kevin, you had said, that in your region, you're expecting, significant volume of electrical cars, somewhere 2030 to 2050. Probably in my region, North America, we're thinking 2025 to 2035. So I think it is probably also unfair to compare the current grid structure with a demand that's going to start peaking 5, 10, and 15 years from now.
Yeah.
I trust that by that time, infrastructure will catch up. Although for the person asking the question from India, you may feel that your infrastructure is somewhat inadequate today. Let me go to the next question on this topic. Kevin, this one is for you. It says automakers are making the shift to electrification. But in Africa, where electricity is still an issue, and demand for gas power cars is still very high, what do you think will be the future in Africa Will there be continued increase in gas push at the, frankly, expense of global warming? Or will the car makers start investing in pushing the electrical cars in your continent as well?
So I think there's going to be, the way we see it is there's going to be an uptake in electrical cars, but it's not going to be sudden, and it's not, and the supply of fossil fuels is not just immediately going to drop. It's really going to be a gradual uptake, which will be driven by investment in charging stations, cheaper access to electricity, so that it makes it sort of attractive for retail stations providing charging opportunities, and also significant investment in PV powered charging stations, or providing solar panels for a lot of the retail stations, because that's going to make it economical. I think that's going to avoid the grid overload concern, and it's going to ensure that the efforts in EV is not counterproductive to high cost of electricity. So this is what we see happening, but we think that significant usage in EV would be driven largely by investment in charging stations, cost, sort of reasonable cost of electricity, and adequate investment in solar power charging locations, i.e. the retail stations. So you can get a scenario where for most retail stations today, you can replace the roof with solar powered panels to provide power to the station, and then that can then be on power to the charging stations to make it all affordable. Because the difficulty is to be selling electricity at the current electricity rates to the car users. It may probably well end up being more expensive than the cost of fossil fuel per liter.
Maybe a last question on this topic coming to you, Joao, so that we can cover some other topics as well, also comes from one of our audience right now, is what do you think these trends, how do you think these trends will affect public transportation?
Oh yeah, that's a topic that is very, very dear to my heart. As I was saying in the introduction, I do hope that more and more transportation is shared, not necessarily public. I mean, there are many business models that are possible for that, but more and more fleet vehicles. I believe that when you're managing a fleet, a commercial fleet, you have many very, very different concerns from a consumer who owns a car. For example, no fleet owner would accept that their vehicles are 95% of the time idle and are only used 5% of the time. And at the same time, you look at the total cost of ownership of each of your fleet vehicles over the lifetime of the vehicle and over how many miles they travel, and so you're willing to make also bigger investment in sturdier vehicles that can withstand many hours of work, and so I do think that the considerations in terms of electrical vehicles in buses are tied to this total cost of ownership view of the entire fleet, and ultimately, how much does each mile or each meter, each kilometer cost me at the end of the day, and how much can I the delivery of certain goods from point A to point B. And so the trend I see is that more and more public transportation agencies are looking into electrical buses and making the decision also to acquire some. I think it's very, very much tied to what kind of incentives governments are also, putting into the adoption of that also for transportation operators. I do believe that, we are going to see more and more electrical fleets, also because governments and public institutions want to set an example, and they want to tell voters and they want to tell users and the general public that they care about climate change, that they care about the environment, and so they are setting an example of being the first to buy electrical vehicles. The city of Porto, where I live, for example, bought all of their service vehicles. The new ones tend to be electric, same thing for the police and so on. So we're seeing more and more this trend, and I think definitely that will help increase the number of electrical vehicles in our city, and obviously a stronger push for electrification of the entire infrastructure.
Maybe a quick lightning question. So more of a yes, no, or pick one or the other. So 10, 15 seconds or under. Kevin, I'll start with you. So electric vehicles for consumers like you and I, or electric vehicles for trucks, for transportation of goods, which one do you think gets more adoption first?
I think goods.
Goods. All right. Thank you. Joao, what do you think?
Yeah, I think fleets, because it's easier to make a decision than for consumers. Yeah.
Hey, look at this, 3 out of 3. I also agree that it's going to be fleets first, although we don't talk as much about it because, we are all consumers, so we think like consumers. But frankly speaking, although we haven't talked about it, I believe fleets is going to go there first because, the mission is more defined, narrow, and the infrastructure is better organized, etc. For our live audience out there, please keep your questions coming. We are covering as many of these and working them into the topics. So please keep your questions coming, and I promise I'll get your questions worked into our topics. But in the interest of time, we'll move into the next topic. The next topic is also a fun topic for our industry. It's driverless cars, autonomous cars. They are coming, yeah? So I was in San Francisco earlier this week, and I was there for 3 days. And right now, today, not 5 years from now, I won't name the brand so that we are not plugging one brand over the other, but I can hail a driverless paid ride in the city of San Francisco today, right now. Of course, for a limited duration only, you can only go certain areas, but I can hail a driverless car to come pick me up and take me on a ride in San Francisco today. So let's talk about driverless cars. Joao, maybe I start with you. Where do you think this technology is? When do we think real adoption? Yes, sir. Where do you think real adoption happens? And maybe Kevin, because you raised your hand, we'll go with you first.
Oh no! I was just going to ask you. Did you try the driverless cars? Did you hail it?
I did. It was a lot of fun. It was good. So my headquarters is in Ann Arbor, actually very close to Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Okay. Yeah.
There's also a very large test. So it is very common in city Ann Arbor that you go there and you see these driverless cars crawling all over. In fact, there is once again, without naming any names, there is also a driverless delivery vehicle. I won't call it a car. It's significantly smaller. It almost looks like a robot. It kind of goes into the pizza place or sandwich place. The guy opens it, puts your sandwich or pizza in, closes it, and then it drives away and it goes to whomever has ordered that pizza or sandwich and then parks there, and that guy takes their order out. This is happening today, not future. Yeah. This is happening today. And there are several cars, several areas in the US, I know in Germany, UK, etc., where this test is already happening. Kevin, why don't we go with you? What do you think? When is driverless cars coming? When this technology?
Yeah. So I think the idea and the concept around driverless cars is awesome, right? It's almost like something out of a futuristic movie. It's almost like something that we've all seen in a movie, and I think people would generally like to have access to them and try them. But in terms of adopting this in the short to near term, I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. And there are a few reasons. And I think one of them is, unpredictability of road conditions, which will probably make it difficult for AI systems to operate safely. And, we all know that, roads are, depending on which region you are, the road network can either be very smooth to access or challenging. And I think to be able to ensure that there's a great consumer base of driverless cars, there's got to be some road predictability. And I think the other thing is also standard regulation, right? How do we ensure that there's standard regulation across the globe? We've been able to achieve that with Current Automated, right? Where you know that if you ship a Toyota from whatever region to whatever region, it's going to be able to adapt based on the regulations that exist. I don't know if, as an industry, standard regulation can be achieved in a very short time. And I think that the third thing may likely be just getting consumers comfortable around AI-related catastrophic incidents. I think in as much as we get very excited about it, some of the incidents that are reported, also never get lost. And so it's also in the mind of consumers. So, I mean, I list these three things, but I feel that these three things are substantial enough and may not necessarily speed up adaptation of autonomous cars.
Joao, how about you? What do you think?
Well, if you're asking me when will we have driverless cars, so May 12, 2024. No, I'm just kidding. so it's incredibly hard to know when, and everyone who predicted so far failed. So unless you put it really far away, because nobody will remember, you can. Having said that, our company Nexar works with several of the major players in autonomous vehicles. We supply them with large quantities of training videos for AI algorithms. So because we have hundreds of thousands of dash cams that capture accident and near accident situations, but also more subtle things like how do human drivers behave in certain situations. And Kevin was talking about different weather conditions and different types of pavement, different traffic situations. That's basically what Nexar's dash cams are capturing, every minute of the day. Now, can the algorithms keep up? It's remarkable. I mean, you see that many of the large corporations that have invested billions of dollars into partnerships to actually fund, companies like Aurora, Waymo, Motional, and so on, have produced several advancements in. I like to call them more than autonomous vehicles. I'd like to call them, digital drivers. So because ultimately it's software that is going to be running on all sorts of different vehicles and platforms, and that's what they're focusing on, is making this digital driver. Now, will this be massively adopted? Is a completely different question of whether these algorithms are good drivers or not. I think one problem, for example, that was very enlightening to me was that in one of the robotaxis pilot, I actually talked with the user experience people, and they were very disappointed because they said the car drives super well. It's super safe. It gives a great experience to the user, but it's always 20-30% slower than any other human driver. And nobody is going to want to take a taxi that is 20-30% slower than another taxi if that taxi is competing, if a robo-taxi is competing with a human-driven taxi. And so what I think is going to happen in more and more cities is that governments are going to push cars out of the inner part of the city. This is already happening in many cities in Europe. Singapore defined a district which is autonomous vehicles only. It makes the problem much easier for the car to drive itself. And then you can expand these districts to actually cover, most of the city and provide a reliable self-driving transportation option. And which can walk, or you can take, electric scooters or something like that. But I do think that we are seeing massive penetration of autonomous vehicles in other domains like agriculture, industrial systems, and in fact we've had autonomous vehicles for many decades. They're called elevators. They only go in one dimension. But funny enough, and I think that this is a really interesting lesson there with the elevators, is that when they first appeared, people were very, very afraid of them. You had to have a person inside of the elevator operating the elevator for people to trust it and go inside. And I think ultimately it's really a matter of time until we have inner parts of the city that only have autonomous vehicles. The service is nice, people like it and use it.
Thank you. Any follow-on comments, Kevin?
No, I think Joao is right, and I think when we talk about autonomous vehicles, I think the mindset goes right into just normal consumer or homes, etc. But then there's industry, right? There's the agricultural industry, and there's several other industries that may be able to utilize this probably very quickly than the general consumer market will be able to utilize it. I think I like that he points it out. Because generally, when you hear autonomous vehicles or driverless vehicles, it's all about, just the general consumer moving from point A to B. But then there's also a lot more value in our industries if we can get the right autonomous vehicles to be able to provide the services. So that's what I would add, yeah.
Again, I will try to wrap up this section with a quick reminder that autonomous vehicle for consumers is what we end up talking about. But remember, autonomous vehicles for fleets, where it's a lot easier because the mission is more specific. You take the same route every time. You have the same distance. So we'll likely get autonomous vehicles or robo vehicles on fleet missions coming a lot quicker, just because it's a lot easier to do it, right? Same distance, same part of the highway, et cetera, et cetera. To put both of you on the spot just a little bit, a quick lightning question before we leave this one. All right, maybe we'll do two lightning questions. The first lightning question, 30 seconds, 60 seconds at the most, is, Joao, we'll start with you. What about cyber attacks? You got RoboCar driving itself.
Absolutely. I think this is, right now it's not economical to do them yet because they're very few. So there are much more incentives to do cyber attacks on betting websites or other types of business, banks and insurance companies. But as soon as they become more widespread, there's definitely that risk. However, I do see that security as a top concern in all of the companies that are developing this type of technology.
Kevin, what do you think? Cyber attacks. Should I be worried? I'm getting in a robo-taxi.
I think we should, but I think that even in today's market, the normal cars that we drive are all prone to cyber attacks, given the increased level of automation that the cars
connectivity. Yeah, absolutely.
So we're finding cyber attacks in the cars that we use today anyway. So I think yes, as consumers, we've got to definitely be concerned, and I think we have to push to ensure that there's more mitigation around cyber attacks than is probably being considered. But like Joao said, it's a continuous thing. You fix this problem, something else pops up, and you fix this problem. So I think we've just got to be careful around, I guess, updating, because the good thing is that these can be updated remotely to ensure that they're robust against cyber attacks.
And isolated. You isolate certain parts of the system. We're pushing more and more intelligence to the edge, especially when you have cameras and you're capturing video, for example. You also have to protect privacy and things like that. So by pushing a lot of intelligence to the edge, you make the system more secure.
As I promised, two lightning questions. So the next one, I'll make it very, very, very specific. So we're talking robo-taxi, kind of like an Uber, except there's no driver, all right? If you have to pick number of years, Joao, will start with you. How many years before that becomes common? If you have to pick 1 year.
10.
10.
I'm not always on the safe side. It's scientifically proven that it's the best answer to that type of question is 10 years.
Kevin, if you're not allowed to pick 10, what would you pick?
11.
All right, so we are a little bit more on the conservative side. Hey, there is a nice comment from one of our audience. I will quickly read it for the rest of us to wrap up this section, and then we have the last 10 minutes. We'll devote it to our last topic. Fair enough? Okay. So one of our audience has written that there are various negative effects because of driverless cars. I want to quickly list what he or she has written. Vulnerability to hacking and remote control. We just talked about it. Computer malfunctions, especially on a freeway or something. Exposure to radiation. I'm not sure, but an issue. And finally, Joao, you already spoke about it, blending human drivers with computer drivers together sounds like a recipe for disaster. So maybe more of what you suggested is like Singapore example, create an area where it's only robo-taxis, only autonomous vehicles, and then sort of expand from there. No? That sounds like a reasonable way to do it. So we have about 9 minutes remaining. One more area on which we did have a couple of questions, and we had previously discussed that we would be of good interest to the team or to the audience out there. So let's get into that last area. The last area really is about this model of selling cars today. So the car makers make the car, they have a franchise network, the dealers get the cars, and then the consumer's experience is really with the dealer. Now, we all know Tesla is the exception. We got that. But for most part, the industry today is the car maker is making it, the dealer is then selling it as the kind of face of that franchise to the consumer, you and I. We already know that OEMs are experimenting more and more to emulate this Tesla model, okay? the direct-to-consumer model. But then in addition to that, isn't there other direct subscription also being experimented with? So there was a very recent BMW selling heated car seats as a subscription. Get your BMW, if you want heated car seats, that's an extra X dollars a month. Or as Tesla is doing $199 a month for their FSD, their acronym for a fully autonomous feature. It's kind of called fully, but you're still supposed to kind of hover your hands over it, etc. So let's talk about this evolving model where the OEM, whether it is for a specific feature like the BMW heated seats or attracting the consumer to come to Ford.com and buy my Lightning on Ford.com and take a delivery from the dealer. Joao, we'll start with you. They're both subscriptions. They're sort of driving the consumer towards the manufacturer now, maybe in a way around the dealer. What's happening here?
So I believe right now it's every car maker's dream, to be able to generate recurring revenue from the fleet. And there have been some attempts to do that on the digital side, for sure, of trying to sell subscription-based digital services, but with very, very modest success. Partly because of the smartphone. The smartphone obviously is very, very successful at serving as a platform for all sorts of applications and services. Consumers are used to subscribing to premium services on their smartphones, but somehow they haven't transferred that behavior from the smartphone to their vehicles and their cars. I'm skeptical. Because I believe that, especially with private car ownership, people are still very much looking at vehicles as, these standalone products they buy once and not as a platform yet. I'll pass on to Kevin because there's some noise here, and I'll be right back just after I switch it off.
Yeah, Kevin, same question for you. Where do you think this is headed?
I think it's tricky. And I think it's also based on consumer behavior. Now, the reason why I say it's tricky is, today, car manufacturers have always had a model where you can either buy a base model or you can practically build the kind of car you want, right? By selecting maybe extra boost or leather seats, whatever. Like consumers do have the opportunity to build their own car. But I'm sure car manufacturers will still tell you that there's only a small percentage of consumers who do that. The rest just walk out, go into a showroom and buy whatever car they want and take the car out, right? So if I don't know what sort of studies have been done in that area to see the viability of that, but I would imagine that if the consumer behavior that exists today, unless there's a compelling reason why that should change, I don't see how that changes with the subscription model in large numbers. So you would find that there would definitely be, some section of consumers who will be very happy to do a subscriber model. But whether that becomes a large base is really something to test. And I'm just inferring from what exists today to say consumers have the ability to really build their own car and have it shipped to them. But most people would rather go into a showroom, look at what is available and buy. So I think for me, those would be my early observations on it. Interesting business model. I'm keen to see how it works.
I think it may actually be a generational change or generational issue. I think young people, because they're more used to using this and everything is subscription based, they might look at the car in the same way. I do think that there are economies of scale in terms of managing fleets, and it seems like the leitmotif of today is that think fleets or think more about fleets, because then the incentives are aligned to actually maximize the utility of the vehicle, and we think a lot about vehicles not just as machines that carry people from one point to the other, but actually as mobile sensors that are basically monitoring the physical world, indexing the physical world, providing with computer vision digital twins of our cities and our roads. And you can make that part of a subscription model as well, where basically the vehicle is also generating revenue to the car makers or whoever owns the fleet and is basically providing the fleet as a service, that they can offer other services, like for example our vehicles can see parking spots in New York on a minute by minute basis. That's a way to monetize those vehicles as well, because they're gathering that information. Our vehicles, can see where are construction sites everywhere, and provide, municipalities with the means to basically observe those construction sites. These are all additional data services that are not tied to the consumer transportation model, but use the vehicle as a platform to generate recurring revenue in other ways.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I want to take maybe two more, and let's call them also lightning questions, all right? Because we are coming to the top of the hour here. So two areas, we'll treat both of them as kind of lightning questions, all right? So the first question is, what do you think that was the question, but I'll expand and say, are the hardest problems for our industry to solve in the next 5 to 10 years? Joao, maybe I'll start with you. What comes to mind?
Business models is the first one that comes to my mind. So business models for, electrical vehicles, digital features, AI in the vehicles. I think the technology is five steps ahead of the business models and the ecosystem around that.
Anything else that may come to mind? You can always come back to it. Kevin, maybe I'll go to you next. And Joao, if you think of something else, we'll come back. Huh? Kevin, what do you think the hardest problems are there for our industry to solve in the coming 5 to 10 years?
I think for us, with the transition, providing adequate EV vehicles, right, to be able to provide a significant number and getting economies of scale. I think we talk about it, but to be able to achieve economies of scale in this current global economy, there are real challenges, right? And I guess maybe that dovetails into Joao's point about business models. But I think the concept and the reality are going to be very challenging.
Yeah, I will add one more, Tanvir, if I may, which is ecosystem resilience. So how, and you mentioned the dealerships, and you mentioned there's like thousands and thousands of people making a living today with the prevalent consumer-owned vehicle, and of course you have the fleets, which is about 27% of vehicles, so very relevant for sure, and way more than half of the traveled miles. But still, is in this ecosystem that includes the dealerships, that includes mechanics, that includes automakers, tier one suppliers, and so on. All of these things that we're talking about, like electrification, is disruptive in many ways. Subscriptions is for sure. More and more autonomy, not just autonomous vehicles, but driver assistance and things like that. these and more digital features and software in the cars. This changes the product and because it changes the product dramatically, it also changes the ecosystem dramatically. And I don't know that we're ready to deal with that yet.
Okay, final question. This is a yes/no question. Okay, so literally a yes/no question. Put a investor hat on and put a entrepreneur hat on. All right, Joao, I'll start with you. So 2 questions, same question, but answer yes/no as an entrepreneur, answer yes/no as an investor. So the question is, would you invest in our industry as a startup? You're an investor, yes or no?
In selling to the automotive sector as a primary...
No, it's a startup in the automotive sector. You're an investor. Would you invest in it, yes or no?
Yes, mobility is key. You always need automotive machines, whatever they look like.
And as an entrepreneur, would you start up a new company in the auto industry?
Definitely not to sell to automotive industry as a first customer. I believe more and more that the way to bring innovation into the automotive sector is to start in the aftermarket and to start with fleets, and then move from the aftermarket and fleets to the automotive side of things. I do think that there's in the aftermarket also some B2C example. Dash cams is an example, but there's also GPS navigation, satellite radio. Many innovations in the automotive that came from consumer aftermarkets to the automotive.
Into the automotive. Kevin, same question for you. So first, you have a investor hat on. Would you invest in a startup in the automotive sector?
Yes.
Okay. And now you have your entrepreneurial hat on. Would you start a new startup in the automotive sector?
No.
Thank you. Clear.
I think there's so much unpredictability and uncertainty that is best managed by existing companies in the sector. And this is my fundamental reason. I mean,
well, maybe we end with a disagreement for the debate. Well, because
we had to have one, we found it.
Yes.
Because there's so many new players at the same time, and just our cities are full with electric scooters that didn't exist before.
Yes, they are.
And there are many new modes of transportation, new inventions coming up all the time. So I think that you can start. Maybe we can agree on starting a company in not necessarily in automotive, but in mobility.
Yes.
In general.
Mobility, yes.
I think that's going to happen for sure.
Yeah, because I mean, we're in an era of disruptions. So, as a new business, you don't have that many shocks. One big disruption, you're out. But anyway, we'll talk about it more.
We have a few minutes at the top of the hour, so I would like to thank both of you. Joao, thank you so much. Kevin, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
For all the audience who have joined us, thank you so much for joining. Everybody, have a good rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Perfect.
Bye.